500 times more powerful than the processors on the Apollo space missions. I have a 20-hour battery, 2 cameras, a high-definition LCD screen, and state-of-the-art damage-resistant glass. Yet I weigh only 4 ounces.
I want one. Make me one. You can't make you one.
Well, actually, no one can. No one person on Earth knows how to build me from scratch. Designers in California, New York, and England conceived my design. My plastic casing is made from crude oil, pumped from places as diverse as Canada, Texas, and Russia. Chemists all over the world refine the oil to form raw plastic polymers. Plastics factories in China then use a process of injection molding to form my body. The copper in my circuit board comes from Chile, the United States, Australia, and elsewhere. My LCD screen is manufactured in South Korea. My image sensors in Singapore. My processor in Taiwan. The lithium in my battery is mined in South America. I am the descendant of thousands upon thousands of inventions that reach back hundreds of years. Millions of people and dozens of companies all over the world are now involved in the technologies.
Like cellular, fiber optics, internet, global positioning satellites, power generators, computer servers.
That allow me to do what I do. No one knows how to build even one of these things. Countless more people in far-flung countries play a role in getting me to a store in your city.
Like ship captains, truck drivers, electricians, managers.
Most of these people are seeking simply to meet their own needs and achieve their own purposes, and have no idea that they play a role in my creation. Of course, I'm not the only smartphone. Different businesses compete for smartphone customers. These competitors inspire my company to make me more fabulous, while still pricing me so that millions can afford to use me at work and at play. Competition also means that my technology, as cutting edge as it is, will be obsolete by your next birthday. If I didn't already exist, you might think that such a flowering of free cooperation, competition, and creation was either impossible or magical. And yet, here I am.
Wow! Tell me again.
Alright, so that last little bit was something that was done. This is a redo of something that was called iPencil, where the originator took something as simple as a pencil and said, nobody on Earth knows how to make a pencil. Like, you couldn't replicate this, a simple pencil. Right, let alone an iPhone. I mean, we get into that level, but even a simple pencil, it's the impersonal coordination of individuals who have no intent to create that final product, potentially, but through their work, it gets done. Right? And that's the market process at hand, kind of through self-interested individuals working to make themselves better off, we get some neat stuff. That's the market system. It wasn't planned, it wasn't coordinated. No one single mind knows how to make an iPod or an iPhone or a pencil even. Not one person on earth knows how to make it. If you put that challenge to them, they couldn't go kind of do it on their own. And so it's right back to the power of maybe Tom and Jen being on the island and getting people together, specializing in what they're good at, so that we can make everyone a little bit better off, or at least the potential to be made better off. All right, so comments or questions on the video? Yeah, I suspect they had her scripted. Yeah, that was almost a scary amount of knowledge for that girl to be doing.
You see like the new board they're coming out with? They're like open wide.
built-in Wi-Fi inside the vehicle?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, it's just amazing the stuff that comes together, and again, the things that we take for granted, the people in North Korea don't have, is one thing to think about. So, anybody know anything about North Korea? Pretty isolated, yeah, very isolated, right? So it's ran by a dictator. So we had our spectrum of governance that we did before with our kind of the pure anarchy at one end of the spectrum, and all authority into one single human being at the other end of the spectrum, some sort of dictator. And reality most of the time is somewhere in between. But what time has shown is that other systems pale in comparison to the market system to bring about the type of prosperity and income that we enjoy. And some other things that economists look at that come about from economic freedom are things like longevity and health, access to clean drinking water. These are some other variables that go kind of outside. You know, people tend to get hung up, well, it's all about greed and money, and that's not what life's all about. Well, there's other things that have been measured, statistically measured, to show that they are improved, that are kind of quality of life things that the market system or that free enterprise and economic freedom bring to the table. And nothing in the course of the last 2,000 years can hold a candle to what the market system has done. And what it's done wasn't exactly planned, right? It's through the decentralized efforts of every individual doing what's best for themselves. That's what makes it scary, because people don't trust that. They're like, well, we're going to leave it up to individuals, and worse yet, individuals that can do their own thing, and we're not going to plan this thing out. And that's why there's a lot of resistance to the market system. And so part of what we learn in economics are the constraints and challenges that we face in setting up a rule of law, a system of property rights and police and government. That's all needed. It's not anti-government one bit, but it is anti-big government for the most part if we're more of a freer market proponent. And the reason is that research and data show that when governments get big and centralized, there tends to be not so good outcomes. So I guess the easy one to point at would be Nazi Germany. That didn't work out so well from a human rights standpoint. Communist Russia, not sure what the heck Putin thinks he's doing now, but it's got small reflections of Stalin and some older time frames. So those systems tended to bring outcomes to the masses of people that were pretty undesirable. So, all right, now what's also interesting is that democracy is not necessarily the answer either, which is kind of weird. How does democracy contrast with capitalism or the market system? What does it mean to live in a democracy?
Isn't it where everyone votes for everything?
Okay, yeah, and not necessarily everything, but yeah, we have that voting system of those who are in authority. So that's pure and straight what a democracy is. And so probably one of the most interesting examples is Hong Kong, who still falls under communist China rule technically. But when the British gave it back in 1997, they set up pretty strict rules of law, and so there is no democracy in its purest form in Hong Kong, and yet Hong Kong shot up to having the type of wealth that the United States does. And they are number one on the economic freedom charts. The United States right now ranks 17th. And we used to be in the top 10 for the longest time, and we used to be in the top 5, even the top 3. But the United States has continued to slip in terms of economic freedom. And so there's a number of different factors. We discussed that in macro class, but I just kind of want to highlight that for you, that there is data that supports this type of free exchange, and that there are other variables besides money that economists measure. In fact, those are the more fun ones to measure in some cases, and definitely more challenging when we start to get off of the dollar signs. Okay, questions or comments there? All right, so part of the reason I teed that up for you the way we did today is that we are going to enter the government into our marketplace and look at the impact of government intervention in the free market. So I have we have been stressing the supply and demand up to this point, and the story that we've told has been a market of pretty free exchange, I guess, is our home base. And now we're going to take that model and we're going to start tweaking it with minimum wage and rent controls and taxes and subsidies, and we're going to allow different types of government policy to enter into that system. So home base is where we're going to start, and that's typically going to be our reference point each time. So we always have to have a status quo, and it's helpful for principles class anyway to start off with this idea of a free market. So here's home base, where we've got an equilibrium quantity being exchanged at some price. So maybe it's $10. So remember, we're measuring dollars along the vertical axis. If we're talking about suppliers, they're receiving $10 for their sale price. If we're talking about the demand curve, consumers are shelling out $10, right? And the first step here in analyzing impact is to try to come up with what is the value to consumers and producers of having a free market. So if there are 100 units being sold of give me a good that's roughly $10. Give me a good, any good? First thing come to mind, roughly 10 bucks. Huh? DVDs. All right, we can do DVDs. So if there's 100 being sold, what is the amount spent by consumers on DVDs given the circumstances that I've given you here? $1,000. So we got 100 units being sold at $10. So total spending, total expenditure or total spending by consumers equals the price times the quantity, or $10 times 100 equals $1,000. What is the amount collected by producers or the seller? $1,000. So that's the market exchange going on. And we touched on that with the relationship of the elasticities and the total revenue curve. It had that humpy part to it, right? So we learned about that. What is the value to consumers? $10? What is the value to consumers? They spent $1,000. Okay.
Or it could be just like your favorite movie, it could be valued more to you than it was somebody else.
Okay, so the value that we place on things is subjective, isn't it? The value that you place on it is different than the person sitting next to you, potentially. Maybe it's the same, but it's unlikely that it's the same if we actually ask you to pin down a number. So first lesson here is that total spending does not equal total value to consumers. Now, if I phrase that question a little differently, what do we know is the minimum value to consumers? The price, and we could even claim to consumers in the whole marketplace $1,000. So the market system gives us that. Why? How do you know that? Well, what can make you comfortable with that statement that they value it at least $1,000? Because they bought it and they're willing to pay it, right? And so we have a voluntary marketplace. Nobody forced them to buy it. That's a key part of this whole thing, right? Is that they chose to buy it, so they've revealed part of their preferences. They've revealed that at a minimum, they're getting a value of at least $1,000. So, total value is greater than or equal to total spending. And the key there is that since the purchase was voluntary, we know that. All right, so economists even go a step further than that. So the demand curve, how are people ordered in terms of their value? By definition of the demand curve, the law of demand says that as the price goes up, careful, the quantity demanded goes down. And then the most important part, ceteris paribus, holding everything else constant. Good. So if we look at this demand curve and we think of 100 people now buying the 100 CDs rather than just one person, because again in the market here we're envisioning there's a number of people purchasing it. Who places the highest value on the DVDs the way the demand curve's drawn? Who places the highest value? On the consumer, sticking to consumers. Who places the highest value? The people who not spend more, because they all spend $10 each. People who can't afford it, where are they on this? Towards what bottoms? So at the top of the demand curve, where do the people that value the DVDs the most, where do they live? If you bear with me on my words here, where do they live on this demand curve? Remember, the demand curve is a collection of points out here in two-dimensional space. Where do the people who value it the most live? Are they on the curve?
Value can't be.
It's not necessarily good, so they're not comfortable.
They're not buying it at all.
So this is people who are buying it. Of the 100 people who bought it, where do the people who value it the most live according to the demand schedule? Connor? Furthest to the right. So the 100th person? Okay? Does everybody agree with that? Kyle, I see you shaking your head. What's up?
I don't agree with it, but I don't know.
But you don't know why. Okay. What do you got? What's your name again? Oh, you're just stretching? Okay, sorry. I'll still have your name. What's your name?
Zach.
Zach. All right. Yeah, if it's not the right, then is it the left? Because logically, if it's this, then can we go further this way? So what about this first person? What were they willing to pay for that DVD? They paid the first $10, but what were they willing to pay? Something higher, right? So that what we've done with the demand curve, this is kind of the reason I'm spending a little time kind of nursing this out of you, is that we're going to start to look at the individual units. And what the demand curve has essentially done is ordered people from the people who get the most benefit to the people who get the least benefit through the price that they're willing to pay, right? So the flip side of saying this is that if the DVDs at Walmart were priced at $24, how many would we sell? One. Nobody else would buy them at $24 because somebody out there does value the DVD at $24. It's just one of those people. As we start to cut the price, more and more people find the DVDs attractive, and now we start to have more and more buyers, the second, the third, the fourth. And so we've really got these people ordered according to their marginal benefit. The benefit that they get from each DVD they buy is reflected in the price they're willing to pay. All right, now that's important because the first person, let's call him Zach, the first person gets how much of a deal? $14 deal, right? If they were being honest with themselves, and Zach might be one of those people like, wow, man, $10? Shoot, I'd be willing to pay $24. I'm buying one right now. Maybe I'll even buy another, but I'm certainly going to buy one, right? So they got themselves a deal. That deal is equal to this vertical distance. The difference between the height of the demand curve and the price that Zach actually paid is what economists call consumer surplus. Consumer surplus. And now, what happens with consumer surplus is if we start to pick apart each incremental unit, somebody out here was buying roughly the 50th one here, which means somebody was willing to pay this amount. Again, I'm just kind of making up numbers here. So let's say this is $15. Somebody was willing to pay $15, but they still only paid $10. That was the market price. That's what the bin had at Walmart when we went there. And so that person received a deal of $5. Now this is starting to get far-fetched. Let's just make sure that we're all on the same page. How many people feel like they've gotten a deal when they bought something? Oh, wait, with a show of hands, looks like this econ stuff has something to it, right? I mean, consumer surplus is real. We all have hopefully gotten a deal and not feel like we got screwed or that we just paid the exact amount that you were willing to at the time you bought it. Which brings me to the 100th person. Did that person get screwed? No, why? Tag? Yeah, it was a fair deal. They were willing to pay $10 because they got $10 worth of benefit, and they actually paid $10. So they didn't get screwed. They just did a purchase. They didn't have any surplus. They didn't have any consumer surplus, but they at the same time didn't get screwed. And so this area, if we talk about that same logic, this triangular region is in aggregate the market surplus for all consumers. This is consumer surplus, which we'll be noting with a CS. So, consumer surplus. Consumer surplus is the, let me put a dollar value measure of the, let's see, let me figure that out. A dollar value measure of the benefit to consumers from a purchase. It is the difference between what a consumer is willing to pay, which is shown by the height of the demand curve, it is the difference between what a consumer is willing to pay, the height of the demand curve, and what he or she actually pays for each unit consumed. All right, so from a standard demand curve, we can do a little math and come up with that number. Let's just say that this endpoint now was 24. I kind of said it was the first unit, but let's say that if we were writing a math equation, the vertical intercept was 24. What is the dollar value measure of welfare for consumers? What is consumer surplus from our example? So, where's our geometry buffs? Right triangle. How do we calculate the area of triangle blue there? Base times height divided by 2, or 1/2 of base times height? Okay, do it. 1200? What's that?
Is it for the whole square or just
For the blue area.
100 times 14 times a half.
So what do we come up with? $700, that's right. So 1/2 of base times height, you got to be careful. Some of you were taking the height being the price, but what we're really doing is taking 14 minus 10 equals, I'm sorry, 24 minus 10 equals 14. So the base was 100 units times the height, which was $14, which gives us $700. So again, we're kind of adding up all of the deals that each individual consumer got. All right, questions there? All right, well, we don't want to leave the producers out of this. So the producers have some surplus too. So producer surplus is the difference between what a producer, or seller if you will, what a producer actually gets and the minimum amount it must get for each unit sold. The difference between what a producer actually gets and the minimum amount it must get for each unit sold. All right, so what does our producer actually get for each unit? $10, right? So we kind of established that early on. The producer's going to get $10. But what's the minimum amount it must get for each unit sold? What do you think is going through a producer's mind on whether they want to provide an extra unit to the market. The cost. Okay? So the minimum amount they must get is given to us by the supply curve in the law of supply. Remember the law of supply? As the price of a product goes up, the producer is willing and able to supply more quantity, ceteris paribus. So as the price goes up, they're willing and able to supply more. Why? Because they need to be covering their cost at the margin. And so last time we said that the supply curve is the marginal cost curve, the cost of each additional unit. So if we now put that terminology on, the cost of the 50th unit, the cost of the 50th unit was, using my numbers here, what do you think? I'm thinking $6.56. You guys can put whatever numbers yours look like. So the cost to the producer of the 50th unit was $6.56. It got $10, and so it received a producer surplus on the 50th unit equal to $3.44. The difference between 10 and that price. Now, that sounds kind of similar to profit, doesn't it? What's our profit equation for the producer? That's the one where I'm using the little pi symbol. Profits are equal to sales revenue, right? Total revenue minus, so let's be a little more tight with that definition, minus what types of cost? Total cost, okay? So total revenue minus total cost gives us the profits that the company earned. I'm just kind of telling you right now, this is kind of like a profit, but it's not the same. Because we're looking at the cost of an extra unit, which, as we'll learn later, doesn't fall into this equation nice and tightly. It's related, but not the same thing. So let's just kind of shelve that for now, and remember what our definition states is that for each unit produced, here's the cost, here's what we got. What about the 100th unit? The cost was 10, and so the amount received was 10. So why the heck would they do that? Inventory, surplus, to kind of find that. We'll come back to that topic yet either. We got all these little neat little fun things here. But right now, I'll just tell you that part of their regular profit, kind of operating profit, if you will, like what we call a normal profit, is buried into that cost number. Because that's the way economists roll. They're kind of taking that into account. So in other words, it's okay for them to go ahead and produce that 100th unit. And so again, we get this little nice little triangular region where if this was, let's say this endpoint was $2. So let's say the vertical intercept of the supply curve was 2. What is producer surplus? $400. Good. So we still have a triangle. Right triangle, so our formula is not going to stay the same, or is going to stay the same. It's upside down, but we've got producer surplus equal to 1/2 of the base times the height of that red triangle, and so we've got 10 minus 2 is 8. 1/2 of 100 times, I'll write it all out here so that we're hopefully clear, of 10 minus 2 is 8. 8 times 100 is 800. Half of 800 is 400. So we got $400 of producer surplus. All right, questions there? The two triangles do not need to be equal to each other. We just kind of proved that. What determines the size of those triangles.
Where the equilibrium point is.
That's part of it. In a free market, where the two are. The intercepts is another factor needed to do the calculation. So a little more abstractly, what determines whether the producer's got a big triangle? How could we make the producer triangle bigger? How could I change things around, relax the ceteris paribus, and actually change this diagram, keeping the price at 10 and giving the producers more producer surplus? Cheaper materials, increased quantity.
The supply curve is more inelastic than the producer's triangle.
Ooh, now we're getting technical. All right, so let's go over some of these ideas here. So somebody said if the demand curve shifted, right? Now that throws out what I was trying to hold constant. If the demand curve shifts, you are correct, we'd have a new red triangle and it would be bigger, but what would happen to the market price? It goes up. So I wanted to come up with a situation where the market price stays at 10 and the red triangle gets bigger. And I think the only thing I've heard so far, I can't remember what everybody else inventoried, but what Jeff said is hitting on something. Zach?
Wages decrease.
Wages decrease. All right, so if wages decrease, supply shifts to the right or to the left?
Either or.
Wages decrease to the right. One of our supply curve shifters that you should have memorized is the price of resources. If the price of resources goes down, especially an important resource like wages, the supply curve shifts to the right. What are 4 other shifters to supply? Price of resources is what?
Preferences.
Not population, because population's on the demand curve, but there's a related one to that. Preferences? No, that is demand. You guys got this consumer hat on. Am I suspecting some consumerism in this crowd? Technology, that's one. So now we got 2. Price of resources, technology, number of suppliers, expectations, price of related, outputs. Good. Those were the 5 things that could move the supply curve around. So you named one of them. Now let me do just a parallel shift here. If this thing shifts to the right because of a decrease in wages, as Zach said, does the red triangle, does the red area get bigger?
Yes.
Definitely. But what happens to the market price? It drops. Doggone it. So that's not going to work. Jeff, what were you thinking? You said something about elasticities. I can't remember exactly how you worded it.
Well, I'm not smart enough to say what would cause the change in elasticity.
Okay, that's
but if
fine.
it becomes more inelastic,
Okay?
then the equilibrium could stay relatively the same.
And what do you mean by tell me in golf club terms here, becoming more inelastic? What are you trying to do?
The line would
Get
move
steeper
up.
like an eye. And as this rotates, if it becomes more inelastic, that's correct, right? I've kept the $10 price the same, but the red area has enlarged. Right? So it turns out, even though we're into chapter 5, by the way, elasticity is going to stick with us, actually, probably most of the semester. I know that's sometimes difficult for people, but remember some of these little tricks like the eye and stuff? So as the supply curve gets more inelastic, producer surplus would grow. Now, what about consumer surplus? How could that grow without price being, ooh, geez, I better not drop that. How could that be changed?
Okay, same answer, just with the demand line.
Same answer except with the demand line, right? So now if I take the demand line and I hold that constant and I rotate it through, you can see the blue area gets bigger. So the elasticities of demand are going to play an important role in the determination of who gets helped and who gets hurt from changes in the market. And where we're going with this is that the changes we're going to implement are going to come from the government. It sounds like you've got the changes down for the free market. Again, if there's a shift to the right or shift to the left of one of the curves due to changes in circumstances. we're going to see some market adjustments, and that would then change the areas of consumer and producer surplus. What government policy is concerned about is the burden of the policy change. The government changing the rules, doing something, is that voluntary or coercive? It's coercive. Now that's a new kind of big word we haven't thrown out there yet. What does it mean to be coercive? If somebody's being coercive with you, what are they doing? Manipulating. Guiding hand in what way? What is your mom and dad doing if you're a toddler at 3 years old? What kind of hand are they giving you when doing what's best for you? And the hand they might be doing is you're dragging and screaming, "I want that toy! I want that toy!" And you are being drugged out to the car, right? So you're doing something against your will or something that you didn't agree to necessarily. So that's all we mean by coercive. It's not necessarily painful. In fact, as we're going to learn, something being coercive could kind of work to some people's benefit. And that's the whole point of this, is having an economic model that we can see who are the winners and who are the losers. If this is our status quo, and producers currently have $400 of producer surplus, and we kind of buy into that concept that that's a measure of their well-being or their welfare, and consumers have $700 of well-being or welfare, then what happens if the government taxes and that raises the price and people buy less? Who gets hurt? Who gets helped? Do the consumers get helped or hurt? Do the producers get helped or hurt? We're going to use this model then to help show the implications of policy change, which kind of brings us into the chapter 6. So chapter 5 and 6, chapter 5 brings you through fairly quickly. It's a fairly short chapter on this part, consumer and producer surplus, learning how to define it. And then I'm going to kind of feather in chapter 6 along the whole way here as we look at different types of government policies, and then kind of tie that back to what we call welfare analysis is what we're doing here. Okay. Questions or comments? Well, let's enter government here. So government intervention. Types of government intervention. We're going to start off with what we call price controls. And one of those types of price controls is a price ceiling. A price ceiling. A price ceiling is a legal maximum price set by government.
We have one on gas, right?
No, there's nothing on gas right now. Nope.
There is in a hurricane, like in Florida.
There can be, yeah, there might be temporary passing of something if there's a disaster, and there have been, we're going to learn what the implications of doing that type of stuff are. But right now I just want you to think the government steps in and says, whoa, you're kidding me? Those 2-bedroom apartments in Ottawa are way too expensive for those poor college kids at $600 a pop. Let's say that they can only be $400, right? So the law in Ottawa is that 2-bedroom apartments cannot be greater than $400. That's the type of thing we're talking about with the price ceiling. So I want to put one little extra note. To be effective, it must be set below market equilibrium price. And maybe we should say free market equilibrium price, if you will. That's our P star that we've been doing where the two lines cross in our home base setting.
Is that why a lot of people, like at the bottom of the
What's that?
Is that what allows towards the bottom of the graph? Because it has to be set below the equilibrium.
Yeah, in order to be effective. So in other words, back to my apartment example, if the government came across and said, all right, guess what? We're going to set a price ceiling of $700 in Ottawa for 2-bedroom apartments. Maybe I should make it more obnoxious. We're going to set a price ceiling of $1,700 in Ottawa on 2-bedroom apartments. Would anybody be affected by that? No, because about the highest priced 2-bedroom in the whole city of Ottawa, if you searched really hard and got granite countertops and about the sweetest pad you can imagine, would probably be $1,200 if you're lucky in the city of Ottawa. Now you go to Manhattan or something and that'll be chump change, and you can be lucky to get a rat hole for $1,700 maybe. But so to be effective, it must be set below the price. In other words, if the market price happens to be about $600, to be effective, we need to set that ceiling price below. All right, so go ahead and draw a home base. We're going to draw lots of home bases, so you guys are going to get lots of practice on this. Supply, demand, hopefully you'll get really quick at it here. Go ahead and do a P1 or a Q1 and a P1, and I happen to perfectly put those in the wrong spot. P1, Q1. All right, let's go ahead and call this the apartment market. Since we brought up this example of rent controls. So the current market price is $600. There's our home base. What's your prediction? Put on our young, blossoming econ intuition students here. That's what economists do. We're in the prediction business. If a government imposes a price ceiling of $400, what do you predict will be the result?
Company will have to cut costs to make any profit at all.
Okay. Demand will go up. Other thoughts? I haven't heard a really great answer yet, so feel free to be at liberty to say more. I really don't like the demand will go up. You could clean that. Quantity demanded might go up because all we've done is change the price, right? So it's not going to shift the demand curve, but we might have some more quantity. And so what would you predict with the quantity demanded going up? Landlords being hit with issues with having to cut costs, maybe. We can kind of feather that into the story a little bit. What do we call that? What do you think is going to happen? Lots of people want them. How many people are supplying them? Not so much. What do we call that? A shortage. Yay, who said that? Jenna, good job. All right, a shortage. So at a price of $400, I'm going to just draw a big fat orange line here and say that that is the floor, or I'm sorry, the ceiling price. We're going to do a floor here in a little bit. That is the price ceiling. By law, prices can't go above it. If the equilibrium price wants to be at 600, then you can imagine prices aren't going to be cheaper than 400, right? They're going to be right at the ceiling price. And so at that price, the quantity demanded is here. The quantity supplied is here. So just to throw some numbers at this, let's just say there was, I don't know, 400 apartments at equilibrium. And after the move, we bumped up to 500 wanting to be rented. But some apartment owners, due to lack of quality and why would they want to fix up their old place where the plumbing just went out, they're going to cut back on the supply of apartments down to 300, giving us a shortage. So I just put 300, 400, 500. It is important for you to start to get comfortable with those numbers that the shortage is 200 units. Because 500 people would like them, 300 people are going to get them. Now, in terms of consumer welfare, question? Yeah?
I was just gonna, so do all like price ceilings cause a shortage thing?
Do all price ceilings cause a shortage? Yes. If it's just purely a price ceiling, and that's part of why economists are the only social science that gets a Nobel Prize at the end of the day, because we're kind of doing, I hate to hesitate it as a pure science, because it's not, in the same way that we have predictable, consistent things going on with electrons and protons, and I don't even know how all that stuff works, but there's like predictable patterns of elements. When you start dealing with human beings, which is what economists do, you're not so predictable, right? So we might have models set up to make a prediction, but things might be a little goofy. But my point with that is that given these assumptions, if you impose a ceiling, the answer is absolutely yes, that there would be a shortage. Without there being any other changes, so without any ceteris paribus thing going on, there would be a shortage. Okay. Any other comments or questions there? So back to our consumer welfare thing. Consumer well-being. When I use the word welfare, we're not necessarily talking about food stamps and unemployment and stuff, right? Not that type of welfare, but well-being of society. Are all consumers really mad about this policy? Are all the consumers just really upset about this policy? No. Now, do all consumers say that's the greatest thing since sliced bread, that the prices are no longer $600? Yeah, it's about time that the government stepped in and saved us from those evil landlords. Is everybody saying that? All the consumers? No. Why? Yeah, because of the shortage. Some people aren't getting them. So there's people that are going without. And that's an important takeaway from this, is that on the face of it, the intention of the policy seems good, but economists specialize in unintended consequences, that there might be some other things that aren't so hot. And so these 300 people are happy, these 200 people are not so happy. So my last comment on this one is that the intention of the policy is to help consumers. But not all consumers get the good when the shortage occurs. All right. Government policy intervention number 2, unless there's any last questions with ceiling. Let's go. Yes?
What about like the people that will pay more and get it before the other people?
Okay. Yeah, no, that's a great point if I'm understanding your question right. What do you mean they're paying more?
Like the people that, I don't know, like I feel like if they're not going to get it, then they're going to offer more.
Okay. Now, so then that gets into the possibilities here of, hey, well, let me open it up to you guys. What sort of stuff is going to happen? I think that's what you're touching on, CJ, right? He's touching on what's going to what is the forces going to be at play once we've taken away the pricing mechanism, right? We've kind of restricted that to 400. What are some things that consumers are going to be doing? Okay, competition, and can they bid up the price? First of all, let me hammer that one out. No, they can't. They can't technically legally do it. So what might they be tempted to do? Some people with a lack of ethics. Hey, look at, hey, did you drop that $100 bill there on the floor? I think that was yours, right? Something a little under the table. So this creates the possibility of some illegal transactions going on. Good.
So the higher income would control the market, like
What do you mean with the consumers?
Yeah. So like you were saying, you know, like the people that can afford to do more.
Yeah.
Want the apartment. So they don't have to go with the shortage. They get more money so they can have.
Right. So they're able to maybe bid it up, but what they're bidding up might be illegal the way they're doing it. But yeah, they're paying a little bit more. Had we not done that, then we wouldn't be making them crooks. Is one way to look at it. If we just left the market go, then everybody who wanted them would get them at $600. Now, do we need to help the low-income people? That's a different question. We might be able to find another policy that is less disruptive to the market to help the low-income people. That's a different ballgame, and that's part of what I'm teeing you guys up for, is to be able to analyze different types of policies. All right, so let me just give you another underhanded thing that could, we got the under the table money. That might be one thing, but maybe there's a garage that normally goes with the property for $600, but now the landlord said, well, it's $400 for the apartment, but that of course doesn't include the garage. The garage is $200, right? And so now we start carving up and being a little creative on how we dish up our apartment. And maybe it's even lawful to do so, by the way. Maybe it's lawful to carve it up that way. And then the bureaucrats say, oh man, that didn't work. Those landlords and those creative consumers, they're just acting like a market anyway. And so, okay, we're going to write a new code in the law that says, and by the way, that includes garages if they're there. And then they think to themselves, well, what's another way that we could carve it up, right? And so then we can just go through this process of loopholes and figuring out how to dodge the policy. All the while, maybe there would be another way to go about it other than this particular policy to get the result that we desire. That would be to help out potentially low income or somebody else get into some apartments. All right, good. Any other comments to make on that? Yeah.
Reduce the quality of the good.
Okay, yeah, the quality of the good, and that kind of is a little bit of what happens with the supply. And depending on the circumstance with apartments, it's kind of hard to appreciate because the supply is like right now, the supply is really fixed, and it's probably fixed for the next couple weeks even, maybe even the next month, maybe even the next 2 months. The supply is pretty inelastic. If we were to actually measure 2-bedroom apartment units in Ottawa, the supply is actually pretty inelastic. But if we look at that more dynamically over time, how many new apartments are being built in Ottawa when this policy is on the books? How many new 2-bedrooms are being built? None, right? So there's no new ones coming in. So then the ones that are there, they might be, well, we have this 2-bedroom apartment complex, but there's a strip mall that wants to go in. I'll just bulldoze down this 12-unit apartment building and we'll build something else. Right? So you start to see how the supply of units over time would start to change. And then Holden and you are kind of bringing up the quality issue that if we restrict those landlords with the amount that's coming in, there might not be the same amount of money to maintain them, replace the carpets, paint the walls, all of that stuff that goes along with property. Did I see another hand up?
I was just going to ask, could you like set up different prices based on income?
Different prices set on income. You can, and are you talking about through the government or through the market process?
Well, you were talking about like helping out lower income people, so I was thinking like the $400 ceiling could be only for like people of a certain income and people who are above that income.
So yeah, the government comes up with all kinds of creative ways to try to possibly impose something like that. And through some other policies, so I want to shelve the government part, but I would like to add the free market part to this, and that is that if landlords are currently at 600, if they have excess apartments being built or something, they might be creative at being able to offer some low-priced alternatives on their own without the government involved through an advanced topic that we'll talk about in about a month or more called price discrimination. Okay? And that can occur without any government intervention. It might be profitable for them to do so, is my point. And we'll learn that later. Okay, so that is our price ceiling. Number 2, a price floor. So a price floor is a legal minimum price. And let me throw right off the bat here what the intent of the policy is. The intent is to help who? The landlords, the producers, right. So now we're flipping the story around and we're saying, wow, $600 is way too cheap. How can a poor company, landlord, business be doing anything at $600? Let's set a law that says no two-bedroom apartments can be less than $800. So now we're going to not allow prices to fall below the floor. Now that is about as far-fetched of an example as you can imagine of that happening in the real estate market. The rent ceiling one has happened and does happen, especially in places like New York with that type of price ceiling. But can you think of any other industry where we may want to protect the seller and impose a price floor? Produce, good, yeah. Agricultural type products, farmers, the family farm. We got to protect the family farm. Well, geez, are you kidding me? $4 a bushel for corn? That's way too cheap. So let's help those farmers out and say that corn can't go below $6 a bushel. That is a price floor. So the intent of the policy is to help producers. To be effective, the price floor must be greater than the equilibrium price. The floor price must be greater than the free market equilibrium price. And then since I'm getting into the podium here, I'm going to draw this one over here. So go ahead and draw a home base. And let's say that we're dealing with corn. We'll make it the corn market at $4 a bushel. So draw the equilibrium price at 4 and just draw a home base for now. Supply, demand. Q1, we've got $4 a bushel, the price of what? The price of corn. Just for fun, let's say it's 100 bushels, just to keep some numbers going in our brain. We think prices are too low for the family farmers, so we're going to impose a price floor at, whatever, I'm doing this a little abstractly, $6. So this is the floor price. Prices cannot go below the floor. So, my budding young econ thinkers, what is your prediction of what goes on in the corn market? A surplus, yes. So excess corn. So producers thinking that they're going to get $6, which they should, because the government said, hey, you're going to get $6, because by law you can't get less. They go out and plant corn to the tune of this quantity supplied. And so maybe they plant it to the tune of 140 bushels. However, at $6, consumers don't like that so much, and they're like, well, geez, instead of corn on the cob tonight, honey, let's have some beans. Right? Let's have some other sort of vegetable. So they start finding substitutes, and they just don't buy corn as much as they used to. They still buy some, of course, but they don't buy as much as they used to. And so they drop back their quantity demanded to 60. So the horizontal distance, the reason I'm drawing it this way is I want you guys to identify that with the horizontal distance at the price floor level gives you this surplus of 60, 80 units, right? So 140 minus 60 is how much is left over in terms of surplus corn. So a surplus of 80 bushels. So what do businesses do when they have excess inventory, when they have a surplus? They have a sale. Are they going to have a sale here? No, a sale's illegal. They get thrown in jail. So they can't cut their price, and so they're stuck with that surplus. So this will lead to a persistent surplus in the market at this point, at least in the short term. All right, so that's not so hot. So for this one, no, I take that back. I was going to do maybe a little bit different direction. We'll leave it at that. So surplus. All right. Questions there? Kind of want to get all these policies down before we start really having super fun with the allocation of these. So, number 3 on our list. So you might want to highlight the price floor and the price ceiling more generally is called a price control. The price is being controlled, if you want to just make that little note. So, number 3 is a tax. We'll be spending a lot of time looking at the tax. So, a tax is a dollar amount. So, a tax is a monetary amount imposed on the sale of a good. A monetary amount imposed on the sale of a good. So, give me an example of that, real world example now. How does it work in real life, a tax?
99 cent store is really $1.08.
What's that?
99 cent store is really $1.08.
Okay, the 99-cent store is really $1.08. All right, because what happens? What do we do?
You multiply their total cost by like
So I want to be careful, not and just because of we might loosely refer to cost, but the final price, right? So we're going to take the final price. If the price was $1 here in Kansas, what are you going to pay when you walk out of the store? 8 point. What? On some things, it can't be 13 for everything. Does anybody else support that?
Yeah.
The normal sales tax?
Yeah, I work at AutoZone, and every time they sell anything, it's like 12.5, something like that.
Okay. Well, first of all, let me back up. There is a local option sales tax that can be added on to the state amount. So I think, and I'm since I'm relatively new to Kansas, I think. Is it a straight 8 Kansas-wide? Do some of you from your other communities, do you pay just 8 only? If from a small town or outside the county? I see some, or is it 8.9? I think it might be 8.9. This might be a little thing we can look up. So at the cash register, it's possible that local communities can add on a little slice for themselves. It's called a local option sales tax, and so that could bump it up. I would be actually shocked. We can look after class. I don't want to do it now. If it's actually 13% in Johnson County, because that's a huge jump. That's a huge amount. I've never heard of it being that high, except for when you go to hotels and stuff. So at a hotel, you know how they jack you up with that, oh, you know, it's our standard 18% tax. Well, some local communities do that for hotels because how much are they hurting their local people? None. It's outsiders coming in from out of town. So like, oh, let's tax the heck out of them. We got that sweet hotel. They won't mind, right? And then they might find out that less people are coming to their town and spending money at it, but that's a different story. So hotel taxes sometimes are higher.
So like each individual hotel can do their own, or do they all do the same?
No, it is by law. So when they pass a hotel tax, everybody within possibly that community or statewide, and hotels are statewide. There's an extra added on to the hotel. So the state of Kansas is using that as a mechanism to collect more taxes too. But then each local community could tack on a little bit on top of that too, depending on how they're set up.
Kansas has a state tax, right?
Kansas does have a state tax, yeah, and that's 8.9. I think, like in Ottawa here, I think it's 8.95, is it? Or, you know, you can look on your receipts, but we can look at this later. I don't want to get hung up on it. But almost 9% is basically the Kansas tax. Now, so that brings me to two types of taxes that we'll look at in class. Two types of sales tax. One is called an ad valorem tax. Ad valorem is another one of those fancy Latin terms that means according to value. According to value. So that's where we get the idea of taxing the price. If it's a higher price good, then we're going to hit you with more tax. It might be a flat rate, in other words, 8.9%, but if you buy $100 worth of stuff versus buying $200 worth of stuff, you end up buying more things. Or maybe the better way to look at it is if you buy the same item, if this golf club here is a cheapy Walmart special $10 club, right? I'm going to pay tax of 8.9% on $10. If I go out and get a nice Callaway and I spend $100 on the club, I'm going to spend 8.9% on the $100. At the end of the day, I still have a golf club, right? That serves maybe the same function, maybe doesn't hit it quite as far, but the one that's more valuable, the Callaway, you're going to be paying more tax on. So ad valorem tax. And we do the same thing with houses. So people with big fancy houses, they pay more in tax because the tax rate might be 2% for everybody, but if you have a $500,000 house versus a $100,000 house, you're going to be paying more money. And so that kind of touches on a way to zap the rich with a little bit more money by having things according to value, so that the more expensive items get hit a little bit more. Okay, so ad valorem is a percent of sale. So this is at the cash register, for example, 8.9% times the price equals the sales tax. That's about all I'm going to say on that because we're not going to talk about that one, even though it's the most common. And the reason is, you guys will like this part, the math is more complicated if we talk about percent of sales tax. So what we're going to do is look at, I guess, kind of more of a flat tax in the sense of it's per unit rather than as a percent of the price. So number 2 is a per unit tax. And this is because the math is easier. So this is the one we tend to do for students in principles class. The math is easier. Woohoo! All right, it's pretty simple. Each unit purchased, instead of based on the price, it's based on the quantity. So each unit purchased is assessed a fixed amount of tax. So for example, $1 per unit. So let's say the tax is equal to $1, $1 per unit. You buy 2 of them, you pay $2. You buy 3 of them, you pay $3. Right? Nice and simple.
Is that kind of like how gas is 9/10 of a cent? Is that an example of it? How every rate of gas?
Yes. If the gas is stated on a per gallon basis, that's right. Yep. So each gallon of gas could be assessed this way. And that is called an excise tax, by the way. It's a special form of tax. That's a little bit different because at the gas station, do you say you want to put in $100 and then you have to pay the tax on top of it? No, the tax is already buried into the number. So it is in there and you are paying it on a per unit basis. Good. Okay, so what does this thing look like? All right, so if you've been drawing a small graph, you know, I encourage you to burn up a tree a little bit on this one and draw yourself a nice big graph just to make sure everything's clear on this first go around. Go ahead and draw home base. So there's our home base. And let's say that, let's say that, I want to kind of keep some easy numbers here. 1, 2, 3, 4. Let's say that this is 4. Let's go ahead and say this is gas, since you brought it up. Sounds good. Now, we just got done saying that gasoline is kind of buried into the price. We all know that, right? When we pump it up. So if the government comes around and says, I got an idea, let's tax gas $1. What happens to the price of gasoline if it's currently $4? It goes up to 5. Good. And so the tax doesn't hurt the producer at all? They just collect it? Does the tax hurt the producer at all? Or do they just collect it? What's that? Good. People are going to buy less gas. Yeah, so something's going on there. It's not quite the same. So again, if we think about this triangle being producer surplus, I'm not going to draw it in right now, there's going to be a quantity effect that we need to take into account. So let's tell the story, though, kind of working through the logic, because I think you're right. Every gas station out there would say, oh, those darn politicians. It's obvious, consumers, why I just marked it up to $5, right? So they hope that they can just pass that tax right on to those consumers. If they were selling 100 gallons a day, which would be pretty light, wouldn't it? 100 gallons a minute, 100 gallons an hour, whatever our term is here. If they had 100 gallons, they're going to jack the price up to 5. And in fact, even if they were selling this amount, they were willing to do $5 if they could sell more, the law of supply. Now we're going to charge $1 more. And maybe even if we were selling just 20 gallons. To cover our costs, we had to get at least this. We were willing to pay that, but now we're going to charge $1 more. And so what we're going to do is tack on $1 to every single price. Yeah, so the supply curve relocates itself. Now, when I tried to harp on you guys about shifts of the supply curve, what did I harp about how we think of the shift? Left and right, right? What's truly going on here? It's actually going up. So this is what I call the fake supply curve. This is the supply curve with a tax. The reason I say it's fake is because some politician came up with it. it wasn't due to market forces of price of resources going up or all the other things we talked about in the free market. It was just because the government wanted to collect some more money to spend on some program that they thought was a good idea, right? So it's a different, I want to kind of emphasize that it's a different supply curve, and it is shifted up. So make sure you always kind of put supply with the tax. All right. So now, at $5, back to our story, it was 4, we jacked it up to 5. Our consumer's going to pay $5 and still buy 100 units. No. How much are they going to buy? Well, the demand curve tells us that information. If that store owner jacks it up to 5, consumers are going to buy this amount. And so, what's going on here? Producers have a surplus or a shortage? A surplus, because consumers at $5 are only buying this amount. So now what does the producer have to do to get that excess inventory moved? Lower the price. And now we're starting to see the interrelationship of how those two things work together. They're going to lower the price right here where the fake supply curve intersects the real demand curve, tells us the quantity after the tax, QT. I'll define that here in a little bit. The quantity after the tax. The price that it needed to fall to get back to the spot where both producers and consumers, given the tax, were happy, is down to $4.50. Now, that doesn't sound all bad for the producer. They were getting $4, but now they're getting $4 to $50. They still gained a little bit, didn't they?
So they lost it.
They still have to rebate that back to the state, right? So the tax has to be paid. In other words, they're not getting the $4.50 that the consumer paid. So I want you to note the $4.50 as PC, and again, I'll note all this later of what these things stand for. PC is the price the consumers are paying after the tax, but how much is that producer getting? $3.50, because the tax was $1. So the tax was this vertical distance down to, look at where I went down to. What is this? The real supply curve. That's the connection. So after the tax, they're only going to get $3.50, which is PP, the price that the producer receives after the tax. Now, what is this little rectangle? What is that little rectangle? Government's chunk. I like chunk. I don't want to call it a surplus because the government usually runs deficits, but yeah, I like the chunk. The government's chunk, right? And how much is that chunk? The area of this rectangle is the amount of dollars that they collected in terms of tax revenue. I hadn't put a number down here, but if this was 80, if the quantity after the tax was 80, in other words, 20 consumers kind of left the market at the higher price, then we've got 80 times $1 worth of tax. The height of the rectangle is the amount of the tax, which is $1. So the edge of this rectangle, which is also the amount that was shifted up by, the tax is equal to $1. $1 times 80 is $80. So the tax revenue was $80, and it's represented by that rectangle. Okay. So let me pause for a second. I'm starting to lay it on you now. questions there? So one of the most striking things is that the consumer and the producer, those two things aren't equal anymore, right? They're not one and the same. The equilibrium price, all we have is the price that's clearing the market. This is PC. 450 is the price that's kind of clearing the market, so to speak, and the producers are receiving 350. So the government has created a wedge. Sometimes this is referred to as a tax wedge. So, note, government drives a wedge between the price consumers pay, which is our PC, and the price producers receive, PP. The amount is the per unit tax, little t. Putting our equation goggles on, little t is equal to PC minus PP. So this is a handy little formula to keep in your mind as you work through this. Consumer price, what the consumers pay minus what the producers get, is equal to the tax. Or you can do a little bit of algebraic manipulation here and put the PP over here and the PC over there, throw the other junk over there. We got PP is equal to PC minus T. What the consumers pay minus the amount of the tax equals what the producers get. Right? Just another way to flip around things. Tax revenue. Tax revenue for the government is equal to little t times QT where QT is the quantity after the tax. Using the numbers that I put on there, we had a tax of $1 times the 80 units gave us $80 worth of tax revenue for the government. And graphically, that equaled this in the picture. And so sometimes we refer to this as the tax wedge. Our next one's very closely related to this in the sense that it's the opposite of a tax. What would be the opposite of the government taking money? Giving money. So our next one's a subsidy. So number 4 is a subsidy. So a subsidy is an amount of money given to producers or consumers. So some of you might have one of those Pell Grants to be in your seat today, right? So you were shoveled a bunch of money from the government. And even on the flip side for education, sometimes institutions like Kansas University or K-State, they get shoveled some money to provide education, right? Now Ottawa is a private, nonprofit university, so we don't get any of that state money in. So we rely on donors and we kind of do our business a little bit differently. Now we get it kind of indirectly because we take you guys on and we accept Pell Grants and other federal subsidized loans and stuff like that. So we accept that stuff. So in a way we indirectly participate in the government's subsidization of education. All right, so go ahead and draw a home base. And let's go look at the education market here. So the government thinks that, whoa, are you kidding me? We can't have $500 an hour tuition rates. So for each credit hour, the market system kicks out a $500 a credit hour figure. We got to help some people out, get them more educated. So we're going to give consumers $200 for every credit hour that they do. What is the effect of that if we're giving a subsidy to consumers to the tune of $200 for every credit hour they take? What do you think happens to the demand curve? Or how do we manipulate the demand relationship relative to the free market relationship here? Goes out to the right. So it's kind of like what shifter, in a sense. It's kind of related in income, right? It's like you got more money. You're getting it for a very specific purpose of education. You can't go spend it on other things maybe, but your tuition rate gets reduced. And so what you're willing to do is actually buy more education at each price. And so you're going to add on that $200 subsidy to your demand. And so we're going to have a shift up of the demand curve. Again, it's kind of a fake demand curve. That is the demand curve with the subsidy. It's fake in the sense that Ottawa University is not going to get $700. But through market forces, there's more people coming, right? There's more people coming to school, and that might have some increased cost at the margin. So there might be some additional costs associated with providing education as it goes up. And it tends to drive prices up to this new level. And we end up with QS, the quantity after the subsidy. The amount of the subsidy is this vertical height, which was equally kind of a parallel shift up, similar to a tax. So all of this is kind of playing similarly there. So this is the per unit subsidy, equal to $200 in my little example here. Ottawa University is not getting all the benefit of the $200. More importantly, the student isn't paying all of what the price on the shelf tends to be stated. So the bottom part of the subsidy touches the old demand curve, which is what your real income is, and that effectively is the price that the consumer pays. Ottawa University gets this higher amount. And so tuition rises to $600 a credit hour, but really all the students are only paying $400 a credit hour. And something isn't adding up. The university is collecting $600. Students are paying $400. Who's paying the difference? The government. So the government's amount of government spending is now this blue area, which is the $200 a credit hour times the new number of credit hours, which is QS. So again, using our anchoring points, if the initial equilibrium was 100, now there's 130 credit hours being done. We've got more smart people running around our globe rather than dumb people. And so hopefully that was worth the 200 times $130 that we spent. So the subsidy amount is equal to this rectangle area, which is base times height, which is $200, or the base technically, I guess, let's do first, 130 units times the $200 subsidy. And what did you come up with for a number? $26,000. So the government spent $26,000 to encourage education among people in society, if that was our intent. All right, we will call it a day there. And we will analyze the welfare impacts kind of